feel the wind so that we can move forward. See what the world needs now, a bit more than a love song. All the hate ain't got us nowhere, new slaves wandering through the forest. When it's all said and done, we that move with sound. Wait and stand in your truth, still your eye open. In that moment arise, lose the shackles from your mind. Choose your vibration. Peace and love, everybody. Welcome to That's So Calysōl. I am your host, Calysōl, and I welcome you to my channel. This is That's So Calysōl, where we have courageous conversations, enlightened conversations, modern conversations with old school charm. I hope everybody's having a good autumn. Hope everybody's doing fine out there. It has been so beautiful. It's been getting cold, and that really has me feeling some sort of way. But that's all right. That's all right. It's what my girlfriend calls sit-down season. And as you contemplating sitting down, I want you to be thinking about gardening. So today we are going to talk to you about the different aspects of gardening and how you can prepare your land now for what's to come in the spring. Now, y'all know the food shortages is on the way. You might not be paying attention to it much, but it is a real thing that we will have to face, and you want to be prepared for it. Now, my last episode, I talked about how to prep your pantry and what all you would want to save for the winter time, right? And I didn't want to create any angst for anyone because in general, we should always make sure that we're prepared for the seasons to come, right? So yes, pantry prep is important, but I really want you guys to understand, like with these food shortages coming down the line, you're gonna wanna make sure you have stockpiled a few things that will help you get through should you not be able to access groceries and fresh food, at the grocery store as much as we've been accustomed to, because, here in America, we really are spoiled. Now, I don't know if all of you remember the story of the ant and the grasshopper, and that story has evolved so much over time. It's really interesting. As I was going back and reading it today, I was like, oh, they evolved the end of the story, right? So the story of the ant and the grasshopper is that the ants spent their season preparing, and the grasshopper would be sitting out chilling under the tree in the shade in the middle of the spring and the summer, right? And it's like, oh gosh, you ants are hilarious. Like, you guys are always working, you're all work, no play. You need to come over here and you need to join me so that we can hang out and have some fun in the shade, relax a little bit, right? And that's all the grasshopper ever did. And the ants are like, yeah, we hear you, grasshopper, and yeah, that shade, it sure does look nice, and it feels good. It's good to chill here with you for a minute and stop and shoot the breeze, right? But we gotta get back to storing up for the winter time and for the autumn and for the months to come, because when all that inclement weather is hit, we ain't going outside to be trying to find no food. We need to be able to go to the pantry. And the ants in the story were counting up how many of these they had and how many grains they had and all of this stuff, right? And the grasshopper was still out there. And in some of the stories, he was out there with his fiddle, right? And he was just dancing and singing and partying and have him a good old summertime time, right? And then as the weather began to turn, you see that the grasshopper is left out in the cold. It's snowing, he's freezing, and I guess somehow Ant ends up going outside and is like, oh my God, what is that over there in the snow? And his grasshopper he done halfway made it on Ant's doorstep, because he's like, Lord, it's cold out here. I'm about to freeze, and I need to get somewhere where it's gonna be safe and warm and where there's gonna be some resources, right? So he had found his way to Ant's doorstep through all of the cold and his turmoil, right? And the ant comes out there and it's like, what is that? And grasshopper's like, it's me. I'm cold. I'm hungry, right? And in some of the stories, right, Ant is like, oh, come on in, Grasshopper, let me help you warm up a little bit. Let me give you a blanket to wrap around yourself. Here, put your feet up and sit in front of my fire. And Grasshopper's like, I'm hungry. And Ant's like, wow, you should have prepared for this season. This is what we've been up to all spring and summer, and you were partying, and now you want to come and you want me to give you some of my food. Now, in today's stories, Ant brought Grasshopper in unapologetically, being loving, brought him in, got him warm, gave him some food, and shared with him. And the moral of the story was like, yes, there is time for fun and games, but there is also prepping season so that you can relax and have fun and games in due season, right? When you think about it, Grasshopper was out partying in the summertime and the spring, but Ant and them was partying, in the wintertime when it's time to be inside. Sit down season. So, said all that to say, please be mindful of the season ahead. Please get your pantry list together. I'll be posting some of those. Definitely make sure you follow me at World of Calysōl on Instagram and Calysōl Official on all other platforms. Matter of fact, you can follow me on Calysōl Official on Instagram as well. That's my music page, right? I got all kind of stuff that I be into. It makes me happy. It brings me joy. Now, I want you to really think about the space that you have, and anybody can grow vegetables, whether you have the most meager and modest space or if you got land. And if you got land, honey, I'm almost jealous of you because, boy, you have innumerable opportunities. For example, a lot of people have like shaded yards. If your yard is heavily shaded, you have a lettuce haven, because lettuce, it does not like direct sunlight. As a matter of fact, it actually is a cool weather crop. Cool weather crop. That's a tongue twister almost, huh? Cool weather crop, cool weather crop, cool weather crop, cool weather crop. Anyhow, yes, lettuces are cool weather crops. So here in zone 5A, which I am in Colorado, we grow our lettuce right now. Actually, we started growing it like September. End of August, you can put your seeds in the ground and pray that your ground is not too hot. And if your ground is like too hot and has direct sunlight, you can put a shade cloth over it until the seeds germinate, because they do need heat to germinate in order to grow, right?
So here's an example of shade cloth, and here it is earlier in the season, just draped over my tomatoes, but you can do it same thing for your lettuce.
But as far as their growing season, they like cool weather. Now, if you've got a shaded yard, you have unlimited opportunity to grow lettuce and spinach and like arugula. Arugula is a lettuce also, right? I knew that. So don't let having a bunch of trees and shade in your yard deter you from becoming a gardener. Because there's things that you can grow that actually love shade. And then if you've got full sun exposure, then you can control what you want to plant to create shade. Like one of the mistakes that I made in my garden this year was that I planted my romaine lettuce in the front row of my root patch. I had like beets, carrots, and parsnips in this patch, and I had this little like strip all the way across the patch that was available, and I was like, I'm gonna put my romaine lettuce in there. Well, what I didn't know was lettuce, if it gets too hot, it'll bolt on you, and bolting means that it goes to seed. It creates flowers, the flowers hold seeds, and it does that when it thinks that it's at the end of its growing cycle. So if you drought it, which means if you starve it of water, it's like, oh, you want me to flower and go to seed, so that's what I'm gonna do. Now that's a wonderful thing if you don't wanna eat that lettuce, but honey, if you wanna eat that lettuce, it's not good. It ends up tasting really bitter. I had a really bad season with romaine lettuce. So, I know people aren't always like willing to share their fails, Honey, my romaine lettuce was an epic fail. And honey, let me tell you, a sister was sharing the romaine lettuce too. I had no idea. I was sharing it with friends and nobody said anything yet, but I'm sure that a few people accidentally made some bitter salads. I'm so sorry. I apologize, friends. I was just being overly ambitious in my sharing and I didn't try the lettuce first. But yes, so when something bolts, once it starts to bolt, it makes it bitter. So like the arugula will bolt fast. The lettuce will bolt fast. The broccoli will bolt fast. But those are all cool weather crops, which means you don't plant them in the spring. You plant them at the very end of summer and you harvest them all the way through fall and sometimes into winter, because that's the type of weather that they prefer. That's the type of weather that they're flourishing, and it actually makes them more tender and tasty. So don't plant your lettuces in the summertime if you're planting them in full sun, but if you got a shaded area that you're like, I've never been able to get anything to grow. Oh, that's Ty getting up. If you have a shaded area where you're like, I've never been able to get anything to grow, that's the area you should grow lettuce in. Now, if you've not been able to get anything to grow, you also want to put yourself some fertilizer down. My favorite fertilizer is Happy Frog. And I also love fish emulsion. Those are really good. And depending on what you're planting, they crave different things. Like you have some things that need more potassium. Some things need more calcium. Other things need more phosphate. You got blood bone meal, which is an actual fertilizer. And the watermelons, the melons love them some bone meal, blood bone meal. If you've got space, utilize it. If you have a patio, utilize it. Just figure out like what your growing season, right? Like growing season is usually spring, which is like end of March. For some places, you got to push it to May. Like here in Colorado, you can safely put things in the ground by like mid-May or after Mother's Day. We've been getting snow on Mother's Day for years now. I don't know when that switch happened, but child, you be trying to take the mamas to get some food and get some nourishment in their soul and show them how much you love them, whatever, right? And it be snow on the ground. So you don't want to plant your garden before that happens, even though Earth Day is before Mother's Day, and a lot of people used to plant their gardens during Earth Day. Well, guess what? Climate change is real, because we used to put our gardens in on Earth Day and they would be safe. But plants that are not frost tolerant, you can go ahead and plant them before the snow is finished if you want, and it'll kill your crops. Like tomatoes, they ain't gonna put up with that. They'll leave. Like, bye, Felicia. You must not want no tomatoes this year. Oh, so make sure you plot your gardens out properly. Like I said, I put that lettuce in a place where it bolted. So next year, the opposite of that is I also had a spot in my garden where I accidentally created like what they call a water trench, because green beans and broccoli and cauliflower, they like to be grown in well-drained soil, which means you plant them in a mound. You create your mounds, and then at the base of your mound, naturally you're going to have ditches, water ditches, right, where all of the moisture can gather. And that's really good for green beans and cauliflower and broccoli, because they don't like their feet to be wet. We call their roots feet in the garden community. So they don't like their feet to be wet, but they do like to have access to the water. So if they're planted on a mound, and the water, when you water it, comes down here, then you can actually water that plant and it's going to pull from the water whenever it wants. Some plants like to be watered from the root up, and some plants don't mind getting water on their leaves. Other plants mind. Tomatoes, you don't want to be watering the leaves of your tomatoes. All of your cucumber buds, which are like your watermelons, cucumbers, pumpkins, squash, those are the cucumber bud family. If you water the leaves, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a problem. You're going to get powdery mildew, which is like this white mildew powder that comes on the leaves. And once that starts happening, it kind of kills that portion of the plant back so that it can't flourish. I had to go through this summer and actually like remove lots of powdery mildew leaves from my garden, but that was because I planted the pumpkins and the watermelons in a raised bed, which is great. They love a raised bed, right? So you got some plants that like trenches, you got some plants that like hills, you got some plants that like raised beds. Well, I planted them in the raised bed, and that was a great thing. But what I didn't understand until I did it was you can't water the leaves. The leaves like to just be there to soak up the sun. You got to water the root of the plant, because if you get the leaves wet, 9 times out of 10 that plant is not going to flourish. So now I understand the importance of drip irrigation. I'm in a community garden, Denver Urban Gardens. That's DUG.org if you live here in Denver. And then there are some Aurora urban gardens as well. Every major city usually has urban gardens. So if you are like me and you live in a condo, I don't have a balcony, and because I live in a condo, all the areas outside are common space that are controlled by the HOA, so I can't plant nothing out there. Well, Denver Urban Gardens was my answer, where I could actually pay for my plot for a whole year and plant whatever I want in there other than weed. I live in Colorado. I have to be very clear. Like, folks be thinking you're a ganja farmer. I could be a ganja farmer, but because I'm in the Denver Urban Gardens, I cannot grow the marijuana. But I can grow anything else that I want. I utilize that as a resource, and I dug in. And honey, let me tell you, them plots, when you inherit them plots, you don't know what you're getting sometimes. I really was grateful this season that I had the opportunity to pick my plot, and my plot was a mess when I picked it, but I could look and tell by all of the weeds that were growing in there. I was like, oh, this is some rich soil. I'm here at my Denver Urban Garden, and here is my little plot. Looks a good hot mess. Gotta get all those weeds up out of there. Clean it up. There goes some of the other plots. Just got mine though, so lots of work to do. Once I purchased my plot from them or rented my plot from them, the very next day I went out there, because thank goodness the weekend that I rented my plot, it snowed, so it softened the ground. So as soon as the snow started melting the next day, I went out there and I got to pulling them weeds. It took me about 5 hours to clear that plot. And that's why I'm telling you, like, think everything out now, even though it's autumn. The cool thing about autumn, about planning your plot and creating your raised beds and picking all the weeds and stuff, is like, it's not hot outside right now, so you kind of get a leg up. I was so determined, and gardening brings so much healing into your life. I had so much frustration that I had to work out in that day and in that season of my life, that I just, like, I got out there and I turned my music on and I put my camera on and I recorded what I was doing. I love documenting what I do, even though you don't see me sharing a lot on social media. Like, I'm always documenting things that I do. So I just went out there and I, put my head down and got in there and got it clean. Y'all remember how it looked? This is the before. And this is the after. So then, once I cleared my plot, that's when I started plotting it, which means you're planning it. And I planted my squash that I was telling you about that got the powdery mildew. I planted that on the other side of the green beans, like on the side of the last end of the green beans where the water trench was. And I didn't realize that squash don't like to be held wet either, and they love a lot of sun. So the way the placement was in the garden, it's like a very shaded area where I planted my squash. So I think I got like 2 zucchinis this year and 1 freaking yellow squash. I am so upset about that because I love grilling yellow squash and zucchini through the spring, summer, and autumn. But no go this year, no go. But next year I'm going to move the squash out of the wet area trench into the raised bed.
Here's everything all de-weeded. Got my trenches in for my green bean rows and my other things that like to be planted in mounds. And then here's all of my trash. Yeah. Clean, 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 and ready to go. Now it's time to go to the garden center. And just to tell you how the universe works, I wanted to plant a strawberry patch, and my garden came with strawberries already in it. This is like the edge of my plot. So I'm gonna relocate these strawberries. And these are all the ones that I got out while I was de-weeding all of this area over here because strawberries are crawlers. So I've relocated them here until I'm ready to figure out where exactly I want to put my strawberries in the plot. Yay, strawberries! Hello, my little friends. Coming together. Matter of fact, it's done. The plot is in. Watermelons, pumpkins, spaghetti squash over there. Spaghetti squash is already starting to tendril out, just like I knew it would. Lettuce and beets and spinach, kale there in the center, tomatoes, peppers, strawberry patch, cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. Oh, and green beans that haven't sprouted yet. Super excited. Time to water. We all have things that we would otherwise just throw away in the trash that can be composted. So I'm super excited. I'm gonna add these in. I'm gonna add my little jar of things. I keep it in a jar because, you know, who wants to have stinky compostable things on your counter, and who wants to buy an expensive compost countertop bin? Get yourself an applesauce jar or a mayonnaise jar or whatever jar, pickle jar, a big enough one, you know. And I'm here at the garden like every other day at least because I gotta water, so this doesn't stay full on my countertop for long. It doesn't get very gross or anything like that. So yeah, there goes our compost. Oh look, an avocado pit. So that means I can bring my avocado pits too. But yeah, this is their compost pile. And basically you just throw all your fresh, uncooked, you know, vegetable stuff. Leaves, pits, shells in here. Rinds. And the sun will cook the pile, and it turns into compost. And y'all know compost is what you put in your garden soil to make it all nice and rich. It has all those nutrients in it. So here's our compost bin system here. So those are the weeds. You throw the weeds in there, and you turn it. You turn it, and you water it. I'm going to be going to a composting class, so I'll learn more about it. Those are like the dry weed section, and then this is like the smaller weed section. And yeah, this is also a composting system here too. Like I said, I'm gonna take the class soon so that I can understand. There's like a master composting class coming up, so I'm like, yeah.
Another thing I did, I don't even know if I have documentation of this. I planted too many pumpkins. I don't know if y'all know, but pumpkins, squash, watermelons, they will take over your whole garden. One time my mama planted 2 spaghetti squash plants, and my mom, she sits on about a little bit less than 1/4 of an acre, and her garden spans from one end of her yard to the other at the back. Child, she planted that spaghetti squash on this end, and honey, the spaghetti squash ran all the way to the other end. I had a client that told me when she lived in North Carolina, she planted a few pumpkins in her yard, and they spanned the block and ran all the way down to the church. Them cucumber buds, they'll run, and they'll take over everything, honey. So next year, we're gonna put the zucchini squash in the cucumber bud bed. Don't be discouraged about your space. Figure out innovative ways to utilize your space. If you got a balcony, figure out what grows in planters, right? Because some things don't like to grow in planters. But I done seen folks grow watermelons in planters. They grow it in a planter, and then they create this trellis that has hammocks in it so that when the watermelons come, they can have something that holds the watermelon. Like, that's amazing to me. I don't have the patience to do that, but I bet you if all I had was a balcony, I would find some patience. Because I like watermelon. Also, I killed my watermelons. That's another garden fail that happened this year. Like, I killed the watermelons and the cantaloupes, and I was so mad. But I was being over ambitious and overzealous. I seen the flowers on the vine, and then I seen some fruit on the vine, and I was like, I got a good idea. I'm gonna fertilize you. And child, I burnt them. And I did it 2 times. I did it earlier in the season, and they burnt back. The leaves curled up and burnt back, and I was like, but I watered it and it came back to life. And then I did it again toward the end of summer, seeing all the flowers and the fruits on the vine, and I'm like, let's give you some fertilizer. And I killed them, and I'm so upset about it because I didn't even get to enjoy that crop. I have a few of the watermelons in the fridge. I had planted sugar babies, and I have a few of those in the fridge because when the vine died back, there were a few that were like at their maturity, so I'm gonna try them and see. But I've got to do some research on when to fertilize things, because other than fertilizing it when you plant it, I'm not very clear yet on my understanding of when to fertilize things. But that's okay, because this was a big experiment, and I saved a lot of grocery money this year. I have not hardly had to go to the store for produce. I planted everything this year. I planted green beans, tomatoes, kale, collard greens, watermelons, cucumbers, yellow squash, zucchini squash, broccoli, cauliflower, serrano peppers, bell peppers, yellow, red, and green, and orange. Then I planted shishito peppers. I also planted a spaghetti squash. I did Brussels sprouts. I did asparagus. And I've been really enjoying wonderful harvest and sharing. Oh, and beets and carrots and parsnips. Then I had some cute little flowers I planted. I just put some poppies in. And right now, everybody in the garden is going through winterizing their gardens, which in the garden world, we call that putting your beds to sleep. Now, most of my beds I'm putting to sleep, but because I planted autumn crop, I still got stuff green and growing. So when I show you this next video, you'll see where most of the garden has been putting their things to bed, and I still have green things growing, okay? Know how to work the land, honey. Know how to work the land. You can get food year round. You just got to know what crops to plant and when to plant them.
So here you're going to see where people have put their beds to sleep, and some people have not put their beds to sleep. They've just kind of let things go to seed and take over. But anywhere where you see hay or leaves, that means that that bed has been put to sleep. And how you put your bed to sleep, like here, is you rip all of your plants out that are not fall crop, and then you put some hay or some straw over the plot so that it can winter over, and you won't have problems with weeds when you do this the next season coming through, because you've covered it up. And it also kind of, as the weather waters the land, you get all of those nutrients locked into your soil. So it's really good to cover your beds with the hay. Some people don't, though. Some people just rip their crops out. This is my plot, and this is the current situation. Like, I still have stuff that's green because I planted autumn crops. Kale, cabbage, spinach, collard greens, Brussels sprouts. Those are all autumn crop. I planted a lot of this crop, these Brussels sprouts, as well. I planted them early in the summer, and I'll be able to harvest them until we get snow that sticks around.
Another thing that is very important that you understand is garden growth patterns. So you have 3 different types of plants, fruits, vegetables, and herbs that grow in your garden. You have perennials, which mean they come back every year. Once you plant them and get them established, unless they get a disease or something, it's coming back every year. You ain't got to worry about it. Now, sometimes with perennials, it takes you a few years to get them established, right? Like asparagus. Asparagus takes a few years to cultivate, but once you get it going, you'll have asparagus for at least 15 years. That's a beautiful thing. What else is a perennial? Oh, most strawberries are perennials, though some strawberries are biennials. So biennials mean that their life cycle is they produce fruit every other year, which means this year, usually the year that you put them in, they produce fruit. And then the next year they produce flowers. The flowers hold seeds. Those seeds go back into the ground, and then you get more the next year. So it does not produce fruit every year, but every other year. That is a biennial or a biannual, as some people like to say. And then you have annuals, which are most of your garden vegetables. An annual means that you plant it, it harvests, and it dies. It's not going to come back on its own. Now, I love green beans straight out the garden. They're so freaking delicious. And I didn't have a garden fail, but I had a garden lesson learned. I planted all of my beans at the same time. So all of a sudden I had all this harvest of green beans, and it was great. And they were so good that I just started washing them and eating them fresh, because they're crunchy, they're delicious, they were fabulous. And then like a week or 2 into harvest, they were done. And that was it. They just died. And I was like, and then some of them was still living, but they wasn't producing no more fruits. And I was like, what do I do? Well, that's when succession planting comes in. And succession planting is when you plant a few of your plants this week, and then you wait about another week and you plant a few more, and then you wait another couple of weeks and you plant a few more, and you wait another couple of weeks and you plant a few more. And you can do this in different areas of your garden so that you have a continuous harvest, right? Because they're going to go in their natural life cycle trajectory. So that's really cool. I learned that this year. So next year I plan on planting my green beans successionally. I also found out that green beans put nitrogen in the soil, and a lot of plants are nitrogen hungry. So like your nitrogen suckers are your tomatoes and your bell peppers. They love nitrogen. They crave it. So what I'm gonna try next year is I'm gonna plant my green beans in the row, right? But when I first put my pepper plants in and my tomato plants, I plan on putting basically a barrier of green beans around them. And if those green beans fruit, that'll be fine for me. But even if they don't, they'll still be putting nitrogen into the soil, and I'll plant my tomato in the dead center of 4 green bean plants. And that way we've got our fertilizer and our food all in one. Isn't that amazing? They call that buddy planting, like a buddy system. Like in the gardening world, companion planting or buddy planting, which means you have one plant that loves a certain nutrient and you have another plant that gives that nutrient. So if you plant them together, they'll do really well, provided one doesn't bring pests that the other one hates, right? Because then you got that. Now, another thing that a lot of people do is they put marigolds at the base, different bases in their garden, because pests hate marigolds. So my planting is going to be very interesting next year. We're going to do a lot of companion planting. I didn't know about companion planting when I put my garden in, but I know about it now. So I'm super excited for next season.
So here's a little look at what everything looks like when it's in full bloom during the grow season. Again, growing season is spring, summer, autumn, and in some growing zones, the winter time as well, depending on what you want to plant and how much time you're willing to commit to cultivating everything. But mainly your grow seasons are spring and summer with a little bit of autumn. Here goes that unruly pumpkin patch I was talking about. And this was after I ripped like 8 plants out. Here's a little treat for all you Brussels sprout enthusiasts. This is what a Brussels sprout bush looks like before you trim it back. Now, in order to get your Brussels sprout fruits to be large, you have to trim the leaves back like this so that you tell the plant to send its energy into the actual fruits. If you don't trim the leaves back, then the Brussels sprouts never get large. They stay small because they don't have enough space to actually plump out like popcorn. And another little bonus, these leaves are absolutely delicious if you prepare them like collard greens. Now look here, cheering babies. This is what it looks like when it's ready to be harvested. This was my first year growing Brussels sprouts, so I had no idea how thick the trunk of this thing is. It is like a tree. So I took my serrated knife out to it, thinking that I would take it down quite quickly. And as you can see here, it gave me a lot of resistance, but I didn't pull it all the way out of the ground because it's a biennial. So if I just deadhead it, which is what I'm doing right now, deadheading is when you chop the top of something off, leaving its root system completely intact so that it can come back the next year. I'm going to be buying myself a machete for next year's gardening endeavors because I definitely see where a machete would come in handy, because this right here, this thing was a monster. And then the first frost came, killing back everything that is not frost tolerant. So all of those spring and summer vegetables that just can't tolerate too much cold. Green beans, squash, pumpkins, those types of things. Tomatoes, they're gone. They're done. Anything that was left over from those crops, we just pulled them out and put them in the compost pile so that they can give back, because there's lots of nitrogen in those leaves. So we'll be needing that for next year's planting season. So we compost that, and all of the areas that I will not be utilizing for autumn crops, I fold in a little bit of fertilizer, and I will either use mulched leaves or hay or straw to just cover those areas and give them some insulation for the winter. I'm leaving you with a lot to think about here. You can use tires for planters. You can use whiskey barrels for planters. Be creative. Think outside the box. Think about those spaces on the side of your house. Think about those spaces that you have in between your flower bushes, because if you've already got flower bushes in, that means that your pollinators are already visiting your garden, and you can put some vegetables in between those flowers. The bees will love it. The butterflies, the hummingbirds, they'll all appreciate it. What are you going to do with your garden space next year? I am certainly looking forward to this coming spring's planting season, and I'm looking forward to all the adjustments that I plan on making. I hope you'll consider doing the same and prepping your land.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This has been another episode of That's So Calysōl. It is my pleasure to share and serve you in the way that I do. If you like what you've heard, if I've given you some good information, if you need to go back and listen to it and take notes, get your notebook and stuff and re-listen, do that. Feel free to share this video with your friends, and don't forget to like the Feel Good Talk page on YouTube and Facebook. I am your host, Calysōl. I do this every other Sunday. Sometimes I do it live, and sometimes I do pre-recorded. Today was pre-recorded for your pleasure because I have somewhere to go and something to do. I love y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, ciao.